Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join today. We're just going to get started in a couple of minutes here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll just get started in another minute here. We're just giving everybody a chance to dial in. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's event. My name is Priya Agarwal. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Paper. For those of you that might not be familiar with the company, Paper partners with K-12 schools throughout North America to give every student an equal opportunity to excel academically. Our educational support system provides learners with unlimited 24/7 homework help, writing feedback, and study support. Our specialized tutors deliver on-demand, one-to-one academic support in 4 languages across more than 200 academic subject areas. So students always have access to expert help whenever, however, and wherever they need it. We're really excited to continue our discussion series in collaboration with SITE, focusing on scaling one-to-one experiences for every student. During these discussions, we've been tackling different implications of delivering that one-to-one experience, including cost, infrastructure, and equity. Today's panel, we're going to be talking about scaling educational equity, one student at a time. For this conversation, I'm really excited to bring together Glenn Alegre, Executive Director of Technology, Innovation, and Assessment at Moreno Valley Unified. Hi, Glenn. Ben Markley, Chief Technology Officer at Hemet Unified. Mike McCormick, Superintendent at Valerde Unified. And Dr. Ryan Smith, Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services at Paramount Unified. Before we dive in, just a couple of logistics for today. All of the attendees are in listen-only mode, but we do really encourage you to share your thoughts, your questions through the chat feature, starting by telling us where you're dialing in from and what your role is, just so we have a sense of who's in the audience. And with that, let's start with a quick round of introductions. I'm going to have each of our panelists tell us a little bit about their districts, their roles, and what one-to-one student experience looks like today in their community. Mike, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks so much, Priya. I appreciate that, and welcome everybody. It's always a pleasure to have a fantastic conversation. And so Valerde Unified, we're located in sunny Southern California, and we've got a very diverse community of scholars that we serve. We're about 77% Hispanic, Latino, around 13% African American. A fifth of our students are learning English as a second language. And about 84% of our students participate in the National School Lunch Program. So we're just under 20,000 students located under over 22 different school sites. And that's kind of Valerde in a picture. Many of our scholars will be first-generation college-going students and their families. And so a lot of things that we do in the district are in place to support our students to be able to attain their post-secondary aspirations. So what are they doing beyond high school and even into the career force? And so a few things we do, which I'd love to get into a little bit later in the discussion, but there you have Valerde.
Thank you so much, Mike. Glenn?
Thank you, Priya. It's so good to be here as well. Excited to share this next hour with you guys. Glenn Alegre, I'm the Executive Director of Technology, Innovation, and Assessment at Moreno Valley. And very similar to what Mr. McCormick said, we are about 84% unduplicated, 77% Hispanic, about 14% African American. And I mean, we're neighbors to the Valerde School District, so we share a lot of the same kids, a lot of the same demographics. One-to-one for us looks like one-to-one for TK all the way through 12. Actually, I take that back. It's actually preschool all the way to 12. We were lucky to be able to, prior to COVID, already have one-to-one in grades 3 through 8. So when the madness happened, it was only outfitting preschool up to 2nd grade for our one-to-one program. And yeah, I'll stop there and share a little bit more later. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for being here today. Ben, over to you.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a little bit about where I come from, which is Hemet Unified School District. I am the Chief Technology Officer here. I've been going on 3 years now in the district, so it's been a great experience and enjoying it. We are very similar to Glenn and Mike and Verde and Moreno Valley. 85% of our students are so unduplicated, and so there's a lot of students who have a lot of need in our community. One thing that was a little bit probably unique about us is that we not only serve the Hemet common area, the community there, but we also serve a number of outlying sites that are kind of in the mountains and the foothills. I mean, Idlewild, Anza, and Sage and Cottonwood area. So it's a little bit mountainous, a little bit challenging many times when it comes to technology. But we are a one-to-one district. We have enough devices for every single student in our district. And we were, of course, many of those were classroom-based. We moved those to being at home to support online learning. But the management of the devices and one-to-one has been something that we have strived to do for the district for quite a while. And we continue to evolve and continue to learn. But internet connectivity and those challenges continue to be something we are faced with again, that 85% of our students duplicated and quite a few not having home internet connectivity. It's always a challenge for us to try to meet, especially in today's experiences with online learning.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. We'll definitely get into a lot of this during the conversation today. Thank you for being here. And Ryan, if you want to close with the introductions.
Thanks, Priya. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you for taking some time to join us. My name is Ryan Smith, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services in the Paramount Unified School District. And in case you don't know where Paramount is, we're about 15 miles or so south of downtown Los Angeles, which if you tried to drive it, would probably take you 2 hours if you know the traffic around here. We are also the home of the Zamboni. Fun fact, so those of you who love ice hockey or ice skating, the Zamboni originated in our town. We serve about 14,000 students in grades TK through 12, and like the other districts, we're incredibly diverse. Almost 90% or so of our students are Hispanic Latino, about 10% are African American, and almost all of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. So our community is a community that serves primarily low-income students. We actually are one of the largest percentages in all of Los Angeles County. Our schools serve students in TK through 12, including adult education, early childhood education, as well as alternative education. And for us, it's been a real pleasure engaging in the work with bringing distance learning together, with ensuring equity when it comes to having technology devices and access to technology. Our work in this area started a few years before the pandemic struck, and really did put us in a good place, as good a place as one could be, to respond to the needs of having to close our schools. We had been a one-to-one school district with Chromebooks in grades 3 through 12 leading up, and made significant investments in our infrastructure to support that, as well as our training to support that. Obviously, once the pandemic struck, we learned a lot and found areas that were shortcomings that we had to address. But by and large, I have to really salute our team for doing some really great work that made that transition as smooth as it possibly could be. And now we're really focusing on the future. And I know later on in today's discussion, we'll be talking about what that future can look like and where districts are hoping to go. And I'm really excited to engage in that conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you again to all of you for being here. So let's get started into the meat of the conversation. A lot of you alluded in your introductions to many of the topics we're going to be covering today. Starting with, obviously this past year, more so than any other in the past, technology and equity or educational equity has become inextricably tied. And so Glenn, starting with you, being on the technology side of the house at your district, would love to kind of hear a little bit about what your department, what your function has really had to tackle with this past year as you've, as technology and equity have become so tied so closely, and what your focus has been this past year, and also kind of looking into what your challenges are right now.
All right, thank you. I had a couple of things that were really challenging. First of all, this was actually I'm finishing up my second, but when this first started, I was in my first year of this role. And what a way to welcome you, a trial by fire, really, to start a new CTO role. And all of a sudden you have to deal with this pandemic and figure everything that's going on. It was quite a challenge. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we were so fortunate that we were already one-to-one in grades 3 through 12. And so when it came time when everything said, all right, we've got to go distance learning, we have to do it now. What are we going to do for devices for these kids? It's like, all right, what can we do? And so I'm sure, like a lot of other school sites, we went into the classrooms, found any Chromebook we could find, whether they were in Chromebook carts and whatnot, grabbed them all, and then did a huge deployment to get them out. And so fortunately now we have all of our kids online, as a lot of districts do already. And we knew it was so important and key for these kids to have that device to use in order for our teachers still to be able to reach out to them, still make a difference in their lives. That was the one challenge. The other one was, which everybody also had to face, was also connectivity and trying to get hotspots and broadband internet to all the homes. I mean, we went out to so many different partners, looked at all the different options as to how we could talk to Verizon, T-Mobile, Spectrum. What plans do you have? Looking at the cost of those and saying, wow, that's still a lot for some of our families to have to pay. What other options do we have there? And fortunately, with some of the monies that came in, we were able to supply thousands of hotspots to all of our families so that they could at least connect. And then realizing that some of our families don't just have 1 or 2 kids, there are 5, 6, 7 kids all in that one family. That one hotspot's not going to do it. So it's then again issuing multiple hotspots to these families so that they can all get connected and actually have a decent experience connecting to school and not having it be so choppy. And it's again looking at what are other ways that we could connect our families. Working with transportation, we were able to put together these Wi-Fi buses where we put together a hotspot that could range about 60 to 100 feet. And if we couldn't get internet to some of the kids, then we would drive a bus into an apartment complex and we'd have the kids come out of their homes and being physically distant, but still being able to connect to the curriculum and connect to their classes. That was such a great program that we put together, and we got a lot of use. I believe at one point we had around almost 20 buses throughout our community with 10 to 20 kids at each bus connecting and being serviced. So really fortunate that we were able to have everybody at least be on more of a level playing field when it came to access.
Amazing, Glenn, and what a great example of just moving so quickly and innovating and trying to make sure that every student in the community was able to be connected in some capacity. I think that's fantastic. Ben, I'd love for you to dive in a little bit more, especially as we talk about how the mandate has evolved. You talked a little bit during our prep meetings around the role of technology and how that has expanded into the community, especially as you tackle some of the equity challenges prevalent in the community at a time like this. So if you could dive a little bit into the evolution of the technology function in a district and your role also, that would be fantastic.
Sure. You know, as Glenn mentioned, we were trying to be very creative in solutions to getting students, you know, connected to their classrooms, right? And normally you drop the kid off, they go to class, and we're good. But clearly, not having a on-campus, you know, instruction created a lot of, you know, challenges for us who were not necessarily prepared for that. And it really, you know, helped us understand some of the challenges our families are experiencing, especially the digital divide, you know, component. And you know, I don't think people quite understand the district's networks are usually one of the largest in the community. You know, we at any time of 25 in our district, 25,000 users on our network on the internet any given moment in the day. And all of a sudden now you're like, okay, now do that at home. You know, and we have, you know, multi-decade-million-dollar networks, and are expected to have these operate on home networks and hotspots and things like that and have the same quality. And it was a challenge. And so I think that that's just to compare them is a very difficult thing to support, especially when we don't have necessarily the resources and the funds available at our beck and call to put the focus on there. And so yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. I think that this moment has raised awareness of the digital divide and maybe the lack of support that school districts have had in supporting these families, especially these needy families that don't have internet. We identified roughly about 20-25% of our families don't have easily accessible internet for their students. May have a cell phone and may have something, but it's not really designed for Wi-Fi and for the home to use. And so we had to support that, and so we worked with different providers, as Glenn was mentioning, and that's where we're pushing, I'm challenging the FCC and USAC, system through E-rate to allow us to, to extend this, these $1 million networks beyond the campus. And right now we're limited. These funds can only reach it, they can't reach beyond the campus. It's stuck to on premises. And, we need to look to expanding that and to providing opportunities for our families. So, and I think hopefully this is the beginning and not the end. Some of this funding we did receive to support us with hotspots and such is not long-term, right? It's one-time money. Mm-hmm. How are we going to maintain this? So it's a great opportunity for us to really reshape, learning with technology beyond the campus, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, the equity conversation, especially the major spotlight that was put on it this past year, a lot of it is around devices and connectivity. But from the conversations I've had with you and many other district leaders, there's a different lens to equity and what role it plays in just teaching and learning beyond some of the devices and connectivity challenges that many of the districts faced in a very severe way and did everything that they could and innovated a lot. But I'd love to talk a little bit about where has the equity conversation gone? What else is being talked about? What are some of the other challenges? And Mike, would love to see if you can shed some light there.
Yeah, thank you, Priya. Yeah, I think that, we've been talking about educational reform for the past, 50 years at least. And we've made little advances. Some people would call it tinkering. And this has everything to do with working in a system where we've all been socialized in the system. And this system produces unequal results. And so it really is about opening up access and opportunity and looking to identify the inequities. And in some cases, this pandemic has shown a spotlight on some of those inequities. And it's, like you say, around the devices, the hardware, the software, but it's also around the concept of teaching and learning and making sure that we're creating culturally affirming spaces that are psychologically safe for all the students and families that we serve. And that to me is really the deeper work here. Clearly Ben and Glenn talked about, the challenges of that last mile in terms of internet service and how do we get broadband to be like any other basic utility like water, electricity. And so we're working very hard on solving those sorts of challenges. But I think if we're going to create classroom spaces that value all learners that we serve, we have to get our teachers and our administrators and school leaders and support staff in a space where they understand themselves. And it's once people understand themselves in the world that we live in that we can begin to open up spaces where our students can begin to understand who they are and what their role is and where they fit into society. And I kind of heard it described with like outrageous love and radical humility are two key components to these conversations. Because when we demonstrate radical humility, that allows us the quality of empathy to emerge. And I think when we have empathy and we get to know people and understand their strengths, and we look at what each unique individual student has to bring to the table, then we can get into a different type of relationship with them. And, you know, one of the things I was talking with a colleague about is just this idea that, you know, we all have teachers and leaders in our systems where the school year is 180 days. And can we think of the teacher or leader who begins the countdown, 179 days, 178, 150 days left? You know, and I think a lot of times we limit our realm around the student-teacher relationship to be 180 days. But what if we went into this relationship saying, this is a 20-year commitment for us. And guess what, kid? I might be at your wedding one day, or you might come back to me and say, what kind of computer should I buy now? Or which neighborhood should I purchase a house in? Or what's the best rates on a home loan? And if we expand our definition of the teacher-student relationship, I think there's much more opportunity for commitment. So I've kind of gone way down another equity thread here, Priya, but these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. Because I think in a lot of ways, the technology, be it the hardware and the software, and we've been doing one-to-one take-home in Valerde with devices and infrastructure for several years. So our transition into distance learning was fairly smooth. But the key question for us became, how do we create authentic and equitable relationships in a virtual environment? And that's a whole different level of, you know, challenge that lies before us. And so what sorts of software solutions can be used to increase engagement? And those are the kinds of things that we were focusing on. And the other thing that I think is a conversation, and then I swear I'm going to wrap it up because I don't want to hijack the conversation, but, you know, there's this kind of new bi-directional expectation in that our teachers are now moving into the space of our students' homes. You know, whereas before, kids would come into that 960 square foot classroom and pretty much be held hostage. I mean, let's call it what it is. And the teacher had absolute control over everything that was happening within that space. And now teachers have had to rethink their strategies for engagement to invite the student into the learning space, or have the student feel comfortable inviting the teacher into their home space for this new educational exchange to take place. So that's enough out of me.
Yeah, no, that was very, that's very true, Mike, the way you think about not just making the space culturally diverse to accommodate all of the different backgrounds of students that you may have, but this notion of breaking down the walls of the spaces. And Ben, you spoke a little bit to that as well, in this notion of teachers now really understanding and seeing into a home environment, which was not necessarily the case in the past. And I don't know if you want to latch on to the end of what Mike said and add anything there before we move on to our next topic here.
Yeah, sure. I think that it's, this has been a great opportunity for us to learn a lot. And one of those things has been able to learn the home environment of many of our students. What is it like in their home? We may have a visual of what we think it looks like, or we assume what it may be like, but having a camera on potentially and interacting with these students while they're at home, you see right into their bedroom or the living room or whatever it may be. And teachers are having an understanding of what our students are dealing with while they're at home, every single day. And I think that is a fantastic opportunity that we should not forget and should not take lightly, that we move on and don't remember it, right? And use it as Mike said, that in that empathy of understanding. I know there was a situation earlier in the pandemic where we had AP testing going on, and we were setting up days to give out devices to students who needed AP testing. And I remember getting an email from one of the students asking if they could pick it up on a different day than we had scheduled to be out there. And I was kind of like, well, what do you mean? This is the time we set, you need to be here. But in investigating, I heard, talking to the student, found out that the student was also overseeing a number of their siblings and was trying to take care of them while their mother and aunt were frontline workers at a hospital. And so they couldn't get there in time. And it kind of put me into perspective, like, wow, I'm focused on me doing my job, and you come get the technology when I say to receive it. But but I didn't quite have that understanding in that regard. And so it really helped me reevaluate some of the decisions that I'm making and get the equipment out and expectations in that regard. So I think hopefully that's happening throughout the system, and that we're having these engagements and opportunities. And as Mike said, I think, online we've learned students don't have to connect. They can decide not to come to school. Where before parents drop you off, bus picks you up, you're here, you're ours for a number of hours. And it was hostage, as Mike said. But now it's like, I'm not going to connect, and I don't like your class, or I'm not interested, or I'm not engaged. I'm just going to do something else. And I think that has hopefully, again, something we have identified and learned, and we reevaluate how we can create those opportunities for them to want to be in school and be engaged and to feel valued and appreciated as our students.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think this opens a really interesting conversation around community and collaboration. We've been talking a lot about the student-teacher relationship and how that has evolved dramatically over this past year, but that we have to expand that conversation also to the other grown-ups in the house. And I know Ryan would love to kind of have you pipe in here around how your district or districts are thinking about the opportunity to involve the whole community, not just teachers, in facilitating learning. There's a saying that I shared earlier in the planning call, it takes a village to raise kids, and truly feel like we're seeing that happen over the course of this past year, where so many people are involved in the teaching and learning and caretaking of students beyond just the guardian and the teacher and the back and forth. So Ryan, your thoughts here around the entire community getting involved.
Thank you, Priya. I think a place where I'd like to start with this is kind of moving from connecting back to the last question, which I think was so important. Because a lot of times when we think about equity, you're right, we have thought about equity in terms of making sure students have a device or have a hotspot or things like that, but it's so much more than that. And Michael took us into a really good place, and so did Ben in that discussion, because we have to think about really what each and every one of our students absolutely deserves and what one of the non-negotiables is. And that to me is the highest quality teacher who cares, who is passionate, and who is able to provide an experience that is culturally relevant, that is rigorous, that has high expectations, and that uses technology in a way that's going to personalize and accelerate learning. If that's the standard, then that's what we're having to work towards when it comes to equity across our system. Think about things before pandemic. We'd hear from teachers, administrators, and others who would say, boy, I don't know how to use a Google Doc. I email, I don't check email very often. We'd hear things like that kind of sound crazy to people in this room, but we've all heard them. And so once our instruction was forced to shift online, And now that we're moving beyond the pandemic, hopefully to some greater sense of normalcy as in the months to come, we have to think about what experiences and what type of instruction each and every one of our students deserve, and build a plan to make sure that each and every one of them get it. And that to me is really the work with equity that lies ahead. The collaboration piece is so important. And one of the things to think about is, obviously we're looking at collaboration within our schools and teachers, parents, and families, but it's also important to look just inside districts in and of themselves. You know, Glenn and Ben are really good examples, and Mike is as well, of how important the synergy is between your CTOs, your IT, and your instructional end of the house. You know, that we can't do this work without each other. And unless there's a seamless partnership where we're all on the same page, none of it's going to work as we move forward in the future. The collaboration aspect in terms of bringing more and more people together is also vital. In Paramount, we've invested in social workers, we've invested in counselors across all of our schools, including elementary. We have instructional coaches at our school sites, and obviously we have our incredible teachers. In the work that we've done together to plan lessons, identify which tools are going to be the right tools to do the job without overwhelming. As you remember, when the pandemic started, I think all of us got floods of emails, free this, free trial that, give this a shot. And sometimes it takes some strong leadership to be able to say, whoa, these are our main district tools. This is what we're going to really support and do well. The other piece is identifying where partnerships can be found. For us, we have always had a really great relationship with our city. And when we were thinking about how can we solve the problem of providing 24/7 on-demand support for students, that's what led us to paper through Mike, actually, which is great. But our city was really interested in solving this problem too, because we're all in it together. Our students, our citizens in the city, residents in the city. And so our city came together with us to provide funding to be able to provide a service like paper, as well as other things like after school programs, et cetera, that have long history here. And that's a beautiful thing, you know, because when we're all working towards a common goal, which is what's best for our students, it's a magical thing. I mean, it's just a great, great thing. It makes everybody feel like we're all bought in and we're all in this together, which is how it's supposed to be.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. Glenn, you had talked a little bit about examples on how support was being expanded, IT support was being expanded to all stakeholders, and some of the things that your district had done to enable that. And again, talking about making sure that everybody in the community is supported to facilitate that teaching and learning for students. So I don't know if you want to touch upon some of those examples in this conversation.
Yeah, you know, my colleagues here have said it very well. I mean, that classroom is no longer the classroom. It's that kitchen table. It's that living room floor. It's the bedroom. And so with that opening up, my team here had to change the way they were thinking, because at first it was, no, we support kids and teachers. We support kids and teachers, and that's all we're supporting. And with the classroom opening up to the whole entire home, we had to say, okay, well, kids are, usually when kids couldn't connect in the classroom, the teacher can jump in and help. Now we're relying on parents to be able to come and help the kids connect or help them with this, that, and the other. And the parents needed help. So in essence, we had like a secretary, which we had to turn into several people into a mini call center so that parents could start calling, not just between the hours of 7:30 and 4:30, but opening it up. We did open it up at first to like 7:30 to 9. We noticed that the calls didn't go as much between 7 to 9, so we shortened it to 7 to 7 or 7:30 to 7. And so providing that expanded support for families so that they know there's a helpline, a support for them to be able to call in was key. Something else that we noticed, and this was, I want to say, a surprising side effect of all these devices at home and collaborating with the community, was that you know, we have all these parent groups. We have, at our district, we have like something, the AAPAC, which is the African American Parents Advisory Committee, or our DLAC. Before, those used to be in person. They had to come to a district room and talk to everybody. With the transition to distance learning, they were now all in Zooms. And because we brought those meetings to the homes and they could now connect with the student devices, surprisingly, we found that a lot of our attendance at these advisory committee groups increased, which was like, we were like, wow, that's amazing. Instead of reaching just the 40 people that could come right after work and stay for 2.5 hours, they can now do it from home. And so the attendance jumped 50, 80, 100 people that could actually jump in on a Zoom and now give input as to what's going on in the classroom, or what's going on at home, what's going on with the district. How can we foster this partnership and make it better so that everybody succeeds? And again, it's that partnership with the parents, with after-hour supports, with these new ways to communicate with them. It just, doors unlocked, and we've seen many incredible things happen this year because of those walls disappearing, and it lets open communication with this new way of, with this online way of learning and communicating.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's
Yeah.
very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, Ben, please. I was just going to open the floor for you and Mike to add anything to this, so please go ahead.
Sorry, I'm jumping at. Yeah,
Go for it.
you know, I want to, you know, I know we're talking about technology, and Glenn and I, you know, come from the technology side of it, but I know we saw a tidal wave coming from our perspective. Technology, again, the challenges of supporting every student in their home, every teacher, many of them working from home. How are you going to support this from our team of a few technicians, right, compared to the masses? And so we were challenged with that. And so I just want to say, as a collective, right, district, it wasn't just technology that took this on, and we actually worked with our parent resource center. We brought in bus drivers, trained them on the process, and we actually created like a parent hotline. As Glenn was talking, I've been trained our bus drivers on like level 1 tech support, and they went through a full day training of how to reset passwords to give them access to all these resources and tools that we built for them with guides and such. But they were the front lines in those situations, and then tier 2 would come over to technology. We would take care of those more complicated or more complex solutions. And your library techs, you know, they're handing out devices, they're handing out Chromebooks and supporting them with hotspots. And I mean, it just takes a village, right, to make this happen, and the switch happened rather quickly. And so I'm just proud of not just our district, I know all of our districts here and throughout the state and the country who have adapted and adjusted and brought in, you know, people from other departments and roles, transportation, food services. You know, they're still doing just those serving meals, you know, on a regular, you know, weekly in our district during that time. And the amount of work that had to be taken on. So anyway, I don't want to just only focus on tech, not that we are, but I just think it's so important to understand that as a team, what we were able to accomplish for our families, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Thank you for sharing. So Mike, I'm actually going to move on to another topic with you though, so if that's okay. There's a lot of conversation about the funds available, especially right now in the federal funding. I would love to get some thoughts from this group on how you're thinking about prioritizing the spending of these funds, how you take what is very large amounts of one-time spends to really propel long-term goals, especially around educational equity. So Mike, anything to kick that conversation off?
Yeah, I mean, this is, the universe has collided and created this space for us to actually have the possibility of doing some of the things we've been dreaming about for a lot of years. And I think for us, that number one thing that we can do is tackle that last mile. You know, as Ben talked about, we haven't been able to use federal E-rate dollars to help us get connected on that last mile. But now we have another funding source that's significant that actually makes this discussion possible. And so, you know, we love the hotspots, and we think that's a great short-term solution, as mentioned earlier. But how can we really think about broadband like another utility? And I know we aren't the only ones that are thinking about this. This is a conversation that's happening state, federal level. But sometimes I think it takes that initiative of somebody who's willing to try and do something. And so that's what we're really thinking about. And we're looking to commit somewhere between $5 and $8 million to make this happen for our community. And, you know, again, like what Ryan talked about, is this is looking for our local partners, our city partners, our county partners, county office of education partners, to see where we can't maybe even pool our money to do something in that space. I think the other immediate and significant need for us is to make sure that we're re-engaging our students as they move back into face-to-face instruction for summer programs and also during the fall. And I want us to be very careful about using deficit labels with this generation of students. And I'm not naive enough to think that, you know, maybe students didn't get as much access to what they needed to learn, just for an example, standard 5.3 in mathematics. And so in that case, there is a learning gap there. But on the other hand, I would say that this is probably the first generation of students who's actually become proficient in the tools of technology that have allowed them to connect in a virtual environment. And when we think about the skills and dispositions that our students are going to need to be successful in post-secondary education and in those career spaces, they now have a leg up more so than any previous generation of students, because they have learned how to operate using these tools. And for us, it always comes back to our portrait of a graduate and what that means for us. And when we use that portrait of a graduate as our North Star, we've never deviated from that. And so big spends are going to be investments in our students and the training of our teachers and support staff, so that we're ready to bring them back onto campus and spend a lot of time actually around social emotional learning topics, making sure we're building back that face-to-face community. I think we've done an amazing job, and kudos to our incredibly creative and innovative teachers in creating those community spaces in a virtual environment. But here's something that people don't talk about a lot, and this will conclude my remarks here, is that during this pandemic, we haven't had any suspensions. We haven't had any expulsions. We haven't had students who feel anxiety about coming into unwelcoming learning spaces that are oftentimes associated with specific classroom spaces or school spaces. And so we've got to do a much better job of welcoming our students back into a face-to-face environment that, again, is culturally affirming, it's welcoming, and it's a psychologically safe space, because there are a lot of kids who have actually flourished in this virtual environment. And now we're going to send them back into spaces that they did not feel comfortable, and in some cases even valued in. So our big spends are going to be through professional development for our teachers and ensuring that our kids can re-engage in the face-to-face environment. And we've got to do a much better job moving forward.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Mike. Ryan, would love to take that same question to you and get your thoughts on spending priorities.
Well, Mike touches upon a lot of things that I think are really important. And, you know, Mike and I I've had the privilege of being friends with Mike for a few years now, and I feel like we're kindred spirits in a lot of ways. One of the things I think is really important to understand is that there's been plenty of learning taking place during this entire experience, just as Mike articulated. It just sometimes isn't what we've typically measured or what we've typically valued when it comes to the approach that we've taken to education and to accountability in our schools. And so one of the challenges for us is to identify what are those things that students have really excelled at, especially around proficiency with technology, collaboration, all of those things that we've said we've valued, but now because of the pandemic and the shift to distance learning, it really absolutely had to happen because there was no way distance learning would work without those things. I also think it's really important, and Mike also touched on this, to make sure that because we have a large infusion of dollars coming from various sources to really support the work moving forward, that this doesn't become a shopping spree where we grab this program, grab that program, grab this initiative, we're going to do a little of this, we're going to do a little of that. And then next thing you know, you have initiative fatigue or paralysis over time, and things don't jive together. Having a strong strategic plan in place, we happen to have one here in Paramount that's been our North Star. A learner profile is something we're working on. Mike's district has shined in that area as well. Those are things that really should keep the work grounded and moving forward in a way. And really the conversation needs to be, what do we need to continue to do that we know currently works? And so investing in our educators, both our certificated and our classified staff, investing in our parents and helping make sure that we bring them along with proficiencies and the support and skills that they need to help make sure their students are successful are so important. Ensuring that we have wraparound services in place, again, access to social workers, counselors, mental health therapists, and other officials. All of those become a critical part moving forward. The last thing I think is also really important is we have to think about what our instruction needs to be moving forward. And I know learning loss really gets kind of the top billing, so to speak. Learning loss, learning loss, learning loss. It's the new Marcia. And if our instruction's only about learning loss, we won't accomplish very much because we have to accomplish so much more. Obviously, we have to close gaps in learning, but we also have to make sure that our instruction is highly personalized for each and every student. We also have to make sure that it continues to move learning forward, because we're not going to gain more time. We have to keep learning moving forward while we're filling in those gaps. It also has to support SEL, but here's the key. It needs to be engaging and relevant to kids. One of the best approaches to SEL and making sure we have increased connectedness is to make sure that our instruction means something to kids and what we're teaching them is valuable for them. You'd be surprised how big of a difference that makes when kids care about what they're learning about, and it truly is authentic. That's the secret sauce that kind of makes a lot of problems much easier to manage. And so for us, as we're thinking about these dollars and funds, that's where our thought process is headed.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you both for sharing that. I'd love to start wrapping up because I have a question that I'd love each of your thoughts on as we do takeaways and wrap ups. A lot of what we've talked about is how quickly schools and districts innovated this past year, how so much that probably would have happened, over the course of the next 3 to 5 years happened essentially overnight. And now all districts are thinking about return to in-person. And there's this notion of, does return to in-person become return to a norm that was the norm a year ago? And I know each and every one of you are really focused on how to make sure that doesn't happen. How do we not lose all of the innovation that happened in the education industry over this past year? So as you think about your takeaways and your closing remarks, I'd love for you to shed light on how do we protect the innovations? What are each of you thinking about? What's one thing that you want to make sure you are protecting as you think about back to school, whether that is happening now for you, whether that's the reality for you in the fall? It's inevitable that it will happen. We will go back into the school buildings, but what's one thing that you want to protect and make sure that you keep as you come back to school? Glenn, why don't we start with you?
Sure. One of the things that I know we're doing for sure is, whether it was software, hardware, mainly software, we're making sure we are purchasing all of those programs again. but not just purchasing for the sake of them being available. And it goes back to the previous question, and I'm fortunate that I'm in the room when our Ed Services directors talk. We're talking about our strategic plan and LCAP. How do those mix together, and how can the funds be used so that it's an intentional, concerted effort to make sure the funds are used appropriately in a seamless fashion, and that they're just not this, this, and this. And so that we say we have to get this program so that what we did in this program during distance learning can still happen. We need to make sure we still have this available so that these avenues are still going to live. Because if we're not intentional about it and have set up some kind of benchmarks, I would assume, but if we don't have those in place, then, and humans are humans, it's easier to go back to the norm and easy to go back to what was comfortable and easy. And as long as we're intentional about what we're doing with strong leadership, I think we'll be able to hopefully hang on to the pieces that we saw that worked really well and continue those on as we move forward into the future.
Thank you, Glenn. Ben, if I can go to you.
Sure. I think to me, a lot of it goes back to the empathy conversation and letting that, and as Glenn mentioned, understanding our families, understanding our students, and looking at it from their perspective and their scope, and how do we continue to make changes that support them. And some of the things I know I've seen in conversations we've had, the things we've changed a bit have been on the grading side of things, some of the grading policies that we have, some of our upper levels and such. And that's because we recognize that there's a need there, right? There's maybe some grading inequalities or whatever you want to call it, but we want to create some awareness around that. And that, I believe it comes from equity and the empathy and understanding of where our students are coming from. And the purpose and the goal of the education system isn't to necessarily punish them for not knowing something in the first month of school, but it's like, did you learn it over that course? And if you did, then you should be rewarded for being proficient in that concept, not what you learn in the first week or first month. And so just those kind of thought processes, I think, are becoming I've heard in our organization here, and I hope that it continues to evolve. But I think it begins with, again, the empathy and putting yourself in the position of a student, and how can we do whatever we can do to give them, the brightest and most successful future, whatever that may be. And I think that's the challenge that we're all driven to meet. And the pandemic has done nothing but make it more, to me, a bigger challenge, and more aware of maybe some of those deficiencies in the system and where we can capitalize a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. For those of you in the audience, while I go to Mike and Ryan, if you have any questions, we may end up with a minute or two here to take them. So please do let us know if you have questions. Mike, your thoughts on innovations that you're protecting as you go and think to going back to in-person?
Yeah, this is what keeps me awake at night.
Mm-hmm.
Is how do we protect what we've gained? And I think what we've gained is our students and teachers using the tools of collaboration and keeping the space between what we used to call in-classroom learning time and extended class learning time outside of school spaces, and keeping that much more flexible than it ever was before, so that, I talked to superintendents in the East, and they're like, we'll never have another snow day again, because education can continue even if we can't get to our school buildings. And I think that's one of the things we've learned most, is that our school buildings have been closed, but education has continued. And so how do we continue to advance the idea that, strong communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and for us, flexibility, which is the key tenets of our portrait of a graduate. How do we further our teachers' use of those tools and our students' use of those tools to connect with kids? And I would just wrap it up by saying that, we want to broaden our definition of student success. And the pandemic has allowed us to do that, because we've we've actually gotten some needed flexibility on some of those accountability measures. And one of my favorite Sir Ken Robinson quotes is, once kids get good at one thing, they tend to get better at everything else. And this is the advantage to broadening our definition of student success beyond traditional measures that are easily assessed. And so I think lots more exploration in this area to come. We got a taste of it during the pandemic, and we definitely want to protect those pieces.
Fantastic, thank you. Being an East Coaster, I don't want snow days to go away, but that's just a little side note. My 5-year-old was very unhappy about that. Ryan, your last thoughts on the panel and just protecting innovations from this past year.
Well, I think one of the things that we've all learned that we probably realized, but it hit home even harder, is that asynchronous learning or learning certain skills and concepts on your own is absolutely possible in a K-12 environment and classroom setting. Think about the last time you personally didn't know how to do something you wanted to do, or you wanted to fix around the house. The first thing you did was go to YouTube and find a video about it, or Google it and find an article. So I think, if anything, we've learned that through asynchronous activities and the smart use of tools and resources that are internet or web-based or something like that, is something that we certainly need to embrace and continue using. And one of the big reasons why is, if we're going to use our time differently, because now we have so much more we need to do with those precious instructional minutes, the only way to do it is to use our allocated time in a different manner. And one way to do that is to continue to allow asynchronous learning activities and individualized, personalized learning activities to continue, to allow teachers and staff to provide small group instruction, one-on-one instruction, goal setting, and other personalized experiences that we know are going to close learning gaps, but also move learning forward. And so I really do hope that that's an aspect for us that we continue to use when we're in person full-time and as close to normal as we possibly can be.
Thank you so much. I just want to open the floor for any of you to share anything else before we wrap up here, because I know we've had some incredible conversations. So just want to make sure that everybody's had an opportunity. Anything else to add to today's panel that you didn't get a chance to share your thoughts on today? Okay.
I'd just like to say thanks to everybody. You know, opportunities like this really are great, because a lot of times we don't get a chance to collaborate across districts and hear what our neighbors are doing, or even our neighbors from afar. And so this has been a great opportunity for me personally to be able to learn and build connections with Glenn and Ben, and further my friendship with Mike. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. Oh, Mike, I'm sorry. Were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to +1 that and say we appreciate Paper and Site for hosting today's event. You guys have been the gold standard. And yeah, it's great. I mean, in some cases, we're like next door neighbors. And, you know, just being provided the opportunity to collaborate with one another. So grateful for the experience today. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you so much to all of you for just such an incredibly insightful and lively conversation. So many takeaways. We're going to do our best to write up a little recap and make the recording available on our website. So keep a lookout for those of you that are dialed in and listening in. This was the last of our series on scaling one-to-one experiences. So thank you again to our partners at Site for co-hosting these with us. We do have a recap of all of our sessions available on the website, on our paper blog, as well as the event website, which I'm posting in the chat now. So if you need that as a reference point, and this one will shortly follow in the next day or two. Thank you again so much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
Take
so
care.
much.
Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.